There we go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 60th episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. I'm so excited to have gotten this far. Um, I've got a good show, I hope, for you tonight. But before I get into that, I want to make some announcements. We've got a really exciting month ahead of us with Paranormal Encyclopedia. I at the moment, have a guest almost every week of February scheduled. I'm going to give you a rundown of who's coming on and when. And then there are some more that I will hopefully be announcing in the near future. So on February 6th, we're having on Stephen LaChance. Stephen's the author of a number of books, including The Uninvited and Blessed Are the Wicked. Regarding the paranormal, he's also appeared in multiple TV shows. We're going to be talking about his new book, which is called Confrontation with Evil. That's coming out the week of the 6th, in fact. And what's really neat and interesting about this book is that Stephen's writing about the Ronald Doe case. For those of you, Roland Doe case. For those of you who don't know what that is, Roland Doe was a young boy who underwent a series of exorcisms in 1949. It was reports of this that would later inspire William Peter Blatty to write his legendary book, The Exorcist. So yeah, we're talking about a case. The case, the big one. This is what started the popularity of exorcism, I think, in our culture. It should be very exciting. If you go to Llewellyn's website, which is his publisher, you can find a very good article he wrote, which about 10 things you didn't know about The Exorcist. If you look on our Facebook pages, you'll find information, the links to that. I'll try and put one in the description. Also, the same day, I'm going to be filming, and this is going to be filmed earlier in the day, and it's going to be pre-recorded, and then we'll wind up editing it and putting it up later. An interview with Leonard Balsera. Lenny worked with Evil Hats Productions for the Dresden Files role-playing game. If anyone doesn't know, the Dresden Files is a hit TV series of books. There's 15 now and more coming. Along with a TV show, and it deals extensively with the paranormal. I mean, vampires, werewolves, ghosts, demons, everything you can think of is in the series. The game covers it all pretty well, and I'm looking forward to talking to him. So the last guest I have scheduled is going to be on the 20th of February. It will be a live interview, as will Stephen LaChance's, and that's going to be Matthew L. Swain. He's a reporter who's currently working as a research writer at Penn State University. He's also written as a reporter and music reviewer, and is the author of the book The Ghosts of Country Music, which is just what it sounds like. It's the ghosts of and hauntings of famous country music stars, noticeable radio stations, recording studios, and other venues for country music. That is what we have scheduled. There are 3 more interviews I'm trying to confirm that I haven't nailed down dates on, and I'll probably be announcing them next week. Hopefully, as long as I manage to nail down dates and be certain that they're happening. So there's one other announcement before I get into the show itself. As you all know, my good friend and co-host Drew Rosansky is currently unavailable. He's away at law school, and we wish him well. We hope it's going well. I have been in touch with Drew. It seems like it's going pretty well so far, aside from the stresses of being in law school. All that said, my point is, I'm sure to co-host. I've discussed this with Amisha, my producer and fiance. I've discussed this with Drew, my co-host. And we all agree I need somebody else to bounce off of. I just don't work that well solo. So here's the thing. I'm not sure who I want to have as a co-host. I've had a couple of people who've mentioned the idea of doing a guest spot, which is at least one possibility, but I would like a more permanent co-host. So if any of you out there watching this are interested, shoot me an email. kevinm.paranormalencyclopedia@gmail.com is my email address. We can discuss it. I'm not going to promise the spot to you. We're going to have this is something very serious and important to me, so I don't want just anyone sitting in the co-host chair. But I'll hear you out. We'll see what happens. I will also say, the other thing I'm currently contemplating is instead of going with a single co-host, I'm thinking about doing a rotating thing and letting a couple of people give it a go. Um, so if that also interests you, let me know. But okay, so that's the situation as it stands with the show. Tonight, though, we've got two topics. One being that I want to try and give an overview of the religion of Judaism. And then, of course, I want to give an overview of my own religion, which is Christianity. I have to say, as much as I adore, and I've said before, I adore researching religion. I adore talking about religion. Religions absolutely fascinate me. And I have a lot of respect for the religions I'm talking about here, not just my own. But this episode and last episode talking about Islam, it feels almost like I'm walking on a minefield. It's not eggshells, it's a minefield. Just because when you look at all of the fear and misunderstanding relating to Islam, and when you look at, even in some ways even more so, all the fear and misunderstanding relating to Judaism, not for nothing, but according to the FBI, 60% of religious-based hate crime in the United States is explicitly targeting Jews. I am not condoning in any way how any form of hate crime against Muslims or any other religious group, but 60% target Judaism. That's a big deal, and there's a lot, and I'm going to wind up talking about and trying to dispel. There's a lot of myths and misconceptions, like the blood libel, and there's the thing I've currently been fighting with people on across YouTube on, which is the absolutely nonsensical idea that the Holocaust didn't actually happen, which I'm hoping to make its own episode. I'm still trying to find someone who's a historian with more direct knowledge of the Holocaust than I have. I've done a lot of research on the facts and the evidence, but I just don't feel qualified to cover the subject fairly. And I'm looking for somebody who's a little more of an expert than I am, which I like, and which we're working on. Hopefully, we'll get somebody. But when you look at all these misconceptions, and the thing is, we're going to talk about the dark side of Judaism, because the reality is there are extremists within Judaism. There are groups that the Israeli government itself qualifies as terrorists. And I don't want to sugarcoat that, and I don't want to ignore that, because I haven't shied away from acknowledging the existence of ISIS and Al Qaeda, and I'm not going to shy away from Westboro Baptist Church when I get into Christianity. But I don't want to fuel the fire of anti-Semites who think, well, you see, that's proof of the evil Jewish conspiracy that they imagine exists. This is also why, after a lot of consideration, I'm going to avoid getting into a discussion of Israel and Palestine's current conflict, because that's a nuclear minefield. And it's a real good way to piss people off in any direction, which is not my intention. So I'm going to just leave that. It's a very political conflict I don't want to get into, because we're talking religion, not politics. So that's going to be set aside. I'm not going to voice a formal opinion one way or the other on the subject. I have opinions, but they're complicated. And we're leaving that at that. But before we get into all the complicated stuff, let's talk about the basics of what Judaism is. So there are generally seen to be the three major monotheistic faiths of the world, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. This is the thing to realize here, and it's a common misunderstanding to a lot of people, is, well, they are the three largest monotheistic faiths in the world. They are by no means the only monotheistic faiths in the world. There's a huge range of religious expression in the world that takes a lot of different forms. But the big three would be these three. And the oldest of the big three, and one of the oldest forms of I think it may in fact be the oldest form of monotheism still practiced in the world. There are older forms. Akhenaten, who was an Egyptian pharaoh who's now largely forgotten, did actually attempt to replace the original religion of Egypt with a monotheistic one, and there are a few other examples here and there through history, but most of them don't exist anymore. Judaism has survived for a very long time. Let me get the exact date. I do it. Its history is believed is over 3,000 years old. It may very well be older than that. We don't know, but it's an old religion. On a numerical side, the world Jewish population is thought to be about 14.3 million, which is about 3% of the, or 0.2% of the world population, with about 43% of them living in Israel and another 43% being here either in the United States or in Canada. The rest mostly are in Europe, and then other minority groups throughout South America, Asia, Africa, and Australia. The key thing, and this is something Judaism has in common with Islam, is that Judaism is a very strictly monotheistic religion. It's not like Christianity. In fact, one of the traditional sticking points between Judaism and Christianity is the idea of the triune God, which we'll be getting into in our second hour when we talk about Christianity, of God being three beings in one. Judaism rejects this. There is only one being. Now, Judaism does have this concept of a Messiah, which is the role that Christians believe that Jesus fulfilled. And we're going to, again, second hour, we're going to get into why the difference on why Jews don't accept that. But that Messiah is seen as a figure sent from God. It's not God. The idea, another thing that's very important in Judaism, and is a common sticking point between the two religions, is that Judaism shies away from anything that even gives an appearance of idolatry. In point of fact, there's a point of interesting history from around from the time of Christ. Pontius Pilate, the man who's famous for having, of course, taken a large part in the execution of Christ, got in a great deal of trouble with Rome because he didn't respect the Jews. This isn't something out of the Bible. This is established history from the Roman records. It had been tradition before Pilate that the Roman legion that served in Jerusalem didn't carry the banners and the standards, and where in other Roman cities and things of that nature, shields would be put up with Roman symbolism on it. That wasn't done in Jerusalem because it was seen as idolatry by the Jews and created issues. Pilate got in trouble because he reinstituted these traditions, which was angering the Jewish population and creating problems. But yeah, along these lines, it's also interesting, I think, to note. I think most people are aware Judaism bases itself primarily on the Torah, which is, and people make a bit of a misunderstanding here. People, when I say Torah, tend to think of, well, Old Testament. The books that most Christians accept as the Old Testament are part of Jewish scripture. There are a few books certain Jewish Christian sects accept that are not, which are deuterocanonical texts accepted by Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. But the Torah itself explicitly refers to the first 5 books of the Bible. There are other names for the other books of the Bible, and collectively it's known as the Tanakh. But it centers particularly around the first 5 books, and its teachings, the Jewish people believe, were brought down by God, were given by God to the prophets. Abraham, Noah, Moses. the other prophets. Generally speaking, the first 5 books are seen as having been written by by Moses himself. Moses is, of course, an incredibly important figure in Judaism. I think most people are aware of the basic story of the Jews being slaves in Egypt. What's interesting here is that Egyptian records don't record the enslavement of the Jews. Jewish records do. So there's a debate historically about, were they actually slaves? Did the Egyptians keep slaves? One of the flaws I see in this argument, from my own understanding of history, is Egyptian history is, to be blunt, unreliable at times. Because the reality is, when certain pharaohs took over, it was very common practice to destroy as much of the records of the last pharaoh as they could. Didn't always happen, but in general, there were a lot of times when various Egyptian pharaohs tried to wipe out all of the records of the preceding pharaoh. Particularly the one female pharaoh whose name I don't recall. I'm not going to look up at the moment because this is a discussion of Judaism, not Egyptology. So I think a case could be made that they may simply have destroyed the records. Particularly if you were to take the Exodus account on faith, and God actually supernaturally intervened to save the Jews from slavery, the Egyptians the future dynasties may have erased a lot of the details just because they were embarrassed by being defeated so soundly by an oppressed people. I don't know for certain. But there is also this concept. It's a concept that gets frequently misunderstood and I think is a large part of this anti-Semitic sentiment, which is that the Jews are the chosen people of God. People, when you hear that, and when I first heard it as a kid, although I've since learned better, people tend to think how arrogant of them to say that they were chosen by God, that they're special. Which sounds good, because when most people say something like, "Oh, we were chosen by God," they mean they're so important, they're so special, they're so superior. When you look at Jewish theology on the subject, that's not what they mean. There are a lot of laws in the Old Testament. I could look up exactly how many, but at any rate, there are hundreds of laws in the Old Testament, ranging from what you can eat, and we're going to get into kosher law a little, and how you can behave, and punishment for crimes. And there are all of these laws that Jews are expected to follow. But remember when I talked about in Islam, traditionally Sharia law only applies to Muslims? All of these Jewish laws apply to the Jews. If because they see themselves as the chosen people of God, it doesn't make them better than people. It makes them more accountable than the rest of us. It's not saying you're better. It's saying, I chose you as my servants. I expect you to be better. I expect you to act better. I hold you to a higher standard than anyone else in the world. So being the chosen people isn't a superior thing. In reality, it's an enormous responsibility. Historically speaking, Judaism, and this is something I want to talk about, and I think this is a logical point to talk about it. Judaism is one of the least militaristic religions in the world, historically speaking. Now, that's only true up to a point. Before the diasporas, before the Jews were driven from their homeland, before various times, according to Jewish tradition, they broke with the covenants they had made with God and lost some of their protections, they were actually very militaristic. There are cultures that we know of, only because the Bible talks about the Jews going to war with them and wiping them out. Just to give you an idea, I mean, since for a long time Judaism has not been a militaristic religion, and while yes, Israel has a very complicated relationship with the military and combat, which I don't want to get in, again, I'm not getting into that political mass, but through the Middle Ages, through a very long period of time, often Jews were explicitly forbidden from even carrying weapons. So, okay, that said, and with the acknowledgement of the historical nature of ancient times, and keep in mind, we're talking about before the time. When I say ancient times, we're talking about before the time of Christ. We're not talking about the Middle Ages here. The Middle Ages are a whole different issue. We're talking about things that are talked about in the Bible. And for that matter, even in the time of Christ, there were Jewish rebellions against the Romans, but the nature of the religion has decidedly changed on that note. The majority of Jews throughout the world are peaceful people. There are extremist sects, and I'm going to get into that later. But as a whole, to paint an accurate picture of Judaism, it's one of the least violent. Today, it is generally one of the less violent religions. But okay, that said, let's see what else to talk about. So let's talk a little bit about. Here's one of the things that always bothers me, because people do this all of the time, and they do it to be bluntly, very ignorantly. When people talk, again, not wanting to get into minefields, I'm not going to get into the whole homosexuality, sinful or not nature, in any part of this video. But when non-Christians talk about the laws in Leviticus and Deuteronomy that are related to homosexuality, they tend to go, yeah, but what about this law about not eating shellfish and not eating pork and not wearing fabric woven of two different materials? And they tend to do it very mockingly. What they don't understand, and what always bothers me about it, is it's true. Christians on the whole do not follow all of these rules and restrictions. Many Jews do. So I find it somewhat ignorant to make fun, because, okay, people think it's crazy and weird how the Bible restricts the eating of pork, and it does. There's no denying that. And they talk about this and they make fun of this because many Christians, not all, but many Christians tend to eat pork products, tend to eat shellfish. But to Orthodox Judaism, the thing to realize is just like there's Sunni and Shia Islam, and there's so many denominations, there are literally thousands of denominations of Christianity. Judaism isn't a single united concept. There are a number of sects, for lack of an easier word for the subject, within Judaism. And the other thing to realize about the fact there are multiple sects within Judaism is that how those sects see each other can be radically different. Or even how they see themselves, even within the same sect. There's a joke that some of my Jewish friends make, and non-Jewish friends I've heard make it too. And there's some truth to this in my own personal experience, that if you ask two Orthodox Jews, which is one of the more traditional sects that follows the older laws, for an opinion on something, you're going to get at least 3 different answers. It's not, and that's one of the things I really respect in Judaism, is in Judaism, debate is welcome, debate is encouraged, debate is considered a good thing. There are exceptions to this, but on the whole, in Judaism, you don't have people telling you this is the only way to understand this, and if you don't listen to me, you're going to hell. Particularly because their concepts of the afterlife are very different than Christian concepts of the afterlife. But there's a much wider range of debate and question within Judaism than most other religions, which is quite frankly something I wish the other monotheistic traditions had embraced. Just because, historically speaking, I think debate is good. I think it's healthy to question what you believe to be true. Judaism also in general, in terms of differences between it and when most people think of monotheism, they think of Christianity, rightly or wrongly. Judaism is very different in its view on a lot of subjects. Some of the bigger differences, just to give you an idea of how they see things differently than what people who aren't familiar with Judaism think of when they think of monotheism, because I have a lot of people who tell me, I've had many people over the years when I point out, wait, you're talking about Christianity, Judaism, not Judaism. They're like, well, what's the difference? There's a huge difference. Christianity, of course, there's the importance on salvation and the importance of faith, where in Judaism, usually it's more of the importance is put more on behavior and actions. And that the idea that your belief comes out of your action. They also, as I said, they reject the idea of original sin, that we're born with the sin, inheriting the sins of Adam and Eve. They also inherently see the world and its people as good, inherently good, because they're the creations of God. And they see life, in particular, a great deal of sanctity to the nature of life, which informs a great deal of what they believe and what they do. And as another thing I happen to very much like in Judaism and respect in Judaism is, so you have all of these laws in Judaism. You have the dietary laws, you have the laws about behavior, the laws about the way you dress, and they're all considered very important. And as a Jew, you're supposed to follow them. There's a concept, and I'll actually look it up to give you the exact listing, called the laws of Noah, which is only 7 laws, which is what they expect of everybody else, and it's a much simpler, less onerous set to follow. But the thing is, the highest law in Judaism, the highest law in Judaism, generally speaking, is to preserve your own life. You're a creation of God. You're important. You're inherently good as a creation of the perfect and all-knowing divine. You shouldn't throw your life away casually. This isn't to say that Judaism doesn't encourage courage and self-sacrifice. It certainly does. But in terms of the law, in terms of all these other laws, for example, in Judaism, even in the Hasidic and ultra-Orthodox sects, if you're starving to death, and the only thing available to eat is pork, eat the pork! Because it is more important, Jews believe it is more important to God to preserve your own life than to follow the dietary restriction. They believe it is more important. The only things that they say, there are lines that they draw that no, you don't. Even to preserve your own life, there are certain lines you shouldn't cross. The 3, I believe, are denying God, sexual immorality, which is somewhat vaguely defined, and there's debate. There's considerable debate within Judaism about homosexuality and other things of that nature. It's not something. Generally, they aren't. Generally speaking, within Orthodoxy and within the more within those sects, it's fair to say it's frowned on, but it's not necessarily to the rabid extent within the most conservative sects of Christianity. but it also depends greatly on the sect in question, the synagogue in question, the rabbi that's being cited. It's a very fluid thing there. Even abortion, it's not as it's looking it up. It's not as simple in black and white there. Apparently, from my reading, and I'll provide sources and the links as always with the set of videos. But they believe that once the head has, during childbirth, when the head leaves the body, that's the point that the child is insouled and is a living person. If it's a breech birth where they're born feet first, it's when half of the body has left the uterus. Before that, abortion is frowned on, but it's considered acceptable, particularly within certain restrictions. Abortion to protect the life of the mother of the child is always acceptable in Judaism, which relates back to what I've been saying about the highest law being protection of your own life. Generally speaking, it's not considered acceptable to abort because of physical genetic defects or disease, because those are seen as part of God's creation, and you shouldn't reject a living thing on those bases. But even there's an enormous amount of debate and interpretation, and various Jewish religious figures have made a number of rulings on the subject, back and forth on a case-by-case basis. It's not the point, again, I'm trying to get across here is it's not a cut and dried. Abortion is wrong. It's very how right or wrong abortion is depends on the circumstances. So, and I'm getting far more political than I would have expected. Let's see some of the other interesting aspects of Judaism. What makes Judaism unusual among religions? Despite what's commonly thought, Jewish proselytizing is a thing. It does occasionally happen, but it's actually very rare. When you look at Christianity and Islam, to a lesser extent, drive to convert people to their faith, and when you look at Judaism's attempts to convert people to their faith, it's very, very different. Which relates back to what I've been saying about in Judaism. It's their rules, their laws are a duty that were given to the Jewish people. It's not something that applies to everyone, so there's no need to convert. So there's a joke again from some of my Jewish friends that the first thing that a rabbi will say to you if you say you want to convert to Judaism is, "No, you don't. You're crazy." And then if you ask him again, "Are you sure about this?" No, you don't want to convert. If you ask him again, "Are you really, really sure? Are you sure this is for you? You might be wrong." And after a lot of debate, eventually they might consider converting you. It's not a thing where you walk into the church and go, "Baptize me," and poof. In fairness, that's not really a thing in Christianity either. But it's not conversion, generally speaking. And again, there are exceptions. Judaism is far too diverse in its opinions, even within single sects, to say absolutely generalize beyond some basic concepts that I've already covered. But there is this concept that, okay, if you really, really want to convert, they will allow you to convert, but you need to be very sure, and you need to understand this isn't necessarily something that is expected. Again, the laws Jews expect for non-Christians is not nearly as complicated, or excuse me, the Jews expect out of non-Jews. Is actually fairly simple. Let me look it up. Okay, so the concept is called the 7 Laws of Noah, or the Noahide laws, or the law. And again, I apologize. I am probably butchering pronunciations. or Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noah. So the 7 Noahide traditions are usually enumerated as: do not deny God, do not blaspheme God, do not murder, do not engage in illicit sexual relations, do not steal, do not eat from a live animal, establish a legal court system to ensure obedience to the law. Depending on how you interpret, mostly depending on how you interpret the idea of illicit sexual relations, these aren't onerous laws for the majority of religious people to follow. Generally speaking, I'd say most Christians and most Muslims largely follow the 7 laws. And really, realistically speaking, depending on how you interpret the illicit sexual relations, and other than the first 2 laws in question, which relate to God, they're not, I think the majority of people would agree that prohibitions against murder, prohibitions against at least some illicit sexual relations like rape or cheating and things of that nature, stealing from someone, eating from a live animal depends, on interpretations in terms of milk and things of that nature. But as far as I know, in Judaism, dairy products are allowed, although they're not allowed to be mixed with meat. But certainly nobody's going to say that we should be taking meat from a living animal to eat it. That's quite sadistic. And the whole system of legal system and a set of laws to maintain order is something civilization has agreed on since ancient times. No, but this is not a revolutionary concept. But again, it's this idea. Generally speaking, it's not generally condemnatory. So before I get into some of the other things, let's talk a little more about some of the general concepts in Judaism, which are interesting. So you have a weekly Sabbath, just like in Christianity. What's different with the Sabbath, what's different with the Holy Day, is where most Christians celebrate the Sabbath on Sunday, Jews celebrate on Saturday. What's also very interesting, to me at least here, is the way they define Sabbath, and the way that is different than how most of us think of a Saturday. Most of generally in the Western world, a day begins at midnight, right? On your computers, it's at 12:01 that you change tonight, that you're going to change from 1/30/2017 to 1/31. In Judaism, the Sabbath starts at sunset and then begins at sundown on Friday and ends at sundown on Saturday. So there's a number of important festivals There's Passover, or Pesach, which is held in the spring. It represents the deliverance out of Egypt, thought to be around 1300 BC, which involves a ritual Seder, which is a meal eaten by every observant Jew in the home at the time. 6 different foods are placed on the Seder plate in the order in which they're eaten, which are karpas, which is vegetables dipped in salt water, which, according to the information I'm going from, which is generally, the site's fairly reliable, represents the bitter tears shed during slavery. A maror, which is bitter herbs to symbolize the bitterness of slavery. Tazeret, which is bitter vegetables to symbolize the bitterness of slavery. Charoset, apples, nuts, spices with wine to represent the mortar used by the Hebrew slaves. Also placed on the plate but uneaten are zero, which is a lamb shank bone, which represents the Passover sacrifice in the ancient temple, and beitza, which is roasted egg to symbolize morning sacrifice, spring, and renewal. Often a boiled egg will not be placed on the plate, but it will be eaten. And this also relates to the story of Exodus and the angel of death coming and killing the firstborn sons of Egypt, but passing over, ergo Passover, the homes marked with the blood of a lamb, which is a traditional sacrifice at the time. And actually, I want to get into. Before I go through the other major Jewish feast days, I want to come back around to the animal sacrifice concept, both historically and today. You also have Rosh Hashanah, which is Jewish New Year. It's seen as the anniversary of the completion of the creation. It's held in the fall. 10 days from go from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, which are days of penitence, and then Yom Kippur is the day of fasting till sundown. Sukkot, the Feast of Booths, which is an 8-day harvest festival, and of course Hanukkah, which is probably the best, aside from Passover, the best known Jewish feast, which is 8 days, that happens in December, of course, which recognizes the war that was fought by the Maccabees in the cause of religious freedom. It specifically commemorates a miracle in the temple where 1 day worth of oil allowed the candles to burn for 8 days. Originally, it was not. According to this, it's become more important recently. It was originally not as important as it's become. There's also Purim, the Feast of Lots, which recalls the defeat of Queen Esther. The defeat by Queen Esther of the plan to kill the Persian Jews, which, as I understand, Purim there's some debate about it, and then Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, which recalls the revelation of the Torah to the Jewish people, which is late May to early June. So aside from that, you have local synagogue, which is the congregation, and normally led by a rabbi. Rabbi being teacher. The rabbi is someone chosen by the congregation. They're generally supposed to be well educated in both Jewish law and tradition. Any adult male, though, with sufficient knowledge, can lead a religious service and perform. In some sects, a woman can also preside. This is particularly done in Jewish communities that lack a rabbi. You have chief rabbis, which are in France and Great Britain. They have authority only by the agreement of those who accept their authority. And then there are chief rabbis in Israel that have civil authority in areas of family law. Which is, again, kind of a thing with Judaism, is study is fairly important in Judaism. Education, knowledge, debate, and things of that nature, which is, again, something I really wish the other monotheistic faiths had carried over more than some of them did, though some do, and we're going to get into that and some of the common misconceptions about Christianity soon. But I still have some more things I want to say about Judaism. I think I've covered the faith pretty well, so let's talk about the herd of elephants in the room, which would be the reality of anti-Semitism, both historically and in the world. Now, there are, like I said, in ancient times, the Jews were involved in a number of wars of a very violent nature. There are questionable Jewish practices today in some ultra-Orthodox sects. And let's be clear, this is not true of all Orthodoxy. This is not true of all ultra-Orthodoxy. In general, it's fallen out of favor. There is a tradition. Well, there's a basic tradition of a bris, which is circumcision done by a rabbi called the mole. This is fairly common in Judaism and in some other cultures, and specifically of men. And if for the one person who listens to this someday that doesn't know what a circumcision is, it's a removal of the male foreskin shortly after birth. This comes from the laws given to Abraham by God in ancient time. It's considered a defining characteristic of Judaism. In point of fact, one of the large things that created the divide between Judaism and Christianity is when St. Paul ceased requiring converts to Christianity to be circumcised. And we'll be getting into that soon, just because that really deals more with Christianity than Judaism. Although not all Jewish sects currently require circumcision, See again previous comments about debate within the Jewish faith. But at any rate, to get back on topic, well, there is some medical debate about the purpose and necessity of circumcision. What I'm specifically referring to here is there are a few ultra-Orthodox, extremely ultra-Orthodox rabbis who, after the circumcision, suck the blood from the infant's penis with their mouth. This creates a whole host of potential medical issues, and there has been outbreaks of a few diseases occasionally in communities that do this. It's also largely fallen out of favor with mainstream Judaism just because of the medical realities involved. But it is still something that is practiced, which is why I'm acknowledging instead of pretending it doesn't happen. The other thing that you run into, and this is a really delicate situation, is as strange as this probably sounds to a lot of people, it always sounds strange to me when I hear it, even though I've done a little research to know it's true. Jewish extremism is a thing. Particularly, there are various actions that have been taken by a group called the Jewish Defense League, which is different than the Anti-Defamation League, which are questionable, and its leaders gotten to a number of questionable practices. There are also a handful of small sects in Israel itself that engage in activity that other Jews consider terroristic in nature. There's a group I managed to find a bit of information on called the Revolt. It's an outgrowth of the hold on, I'm trying to remember the name. But anyway, the Revolt is a group. It's a very, very small group. Some of the records I've seen on it say we're talking about 15 people, literally 15 people. We're not talking about something as giant as ISIS or Al-Qaeda back in its time. We're talking about a very small group of extremists that are very strongly in favor of Israel as a state and have massive issues with Palestine. They believe basically whenever Palestine does something, that's what I was looking for. It's an outgrowth of what's called the price tag movement, which began back in 2008. Basically, the idea is to deter house demolitions of settlements and outposts by setting a price. Basically, Palestine does something to the Jews do something back. The big difference with the revolt is that they've dropped the idea of the retaliation being proportional. Now, this stray, I don't want to keep going on this long because this strays squarely in political territory, but it's fair. I consider it fair to refer to this group as an extremist sect because the Israeli government does so. And the Israeli government has publicly denounced what they're doing. So I don't see a great deal of anti-Semitism in just agreeing with other Jewish authorities on the subject. But the point being is that, yes, Jewish extremism is a thing. It is not as widespread. It is not as common as other forms of extremism in the world. But to say that it doesn't exist at all would be inaccurate. That said, there's a lot of nonsense out there about Judaism, much of which comes from gross misunderstandings of Jewish tradition, some of which is downright laughable. If you study Jewish history and Jewish belief structures, one of the biggest and most despicable concepts is the idea of what they call blood libel. Blood libel, thank God in heaven, and I don't mean that sarcastically, I mean that quite literally, has largely fallen out of favor in the world You only find it in a few very extreme right-wing groups, and in some of the neo-Nazis, KKK, and other groups that are blatantly anti-Semite. But it's a belief that dates back to the Middle Ages, where it was thought that Jews were stealing and sacrificing Christian infants to use their blood for the Passover rites, and specifically to use it in food. Aside from the fact there is absolutely no historical evidence of this ever happening, it's a rumor, it's a myth, it's a load of horse manure. And I'd call it what it is, except YouTube's standards, community standards these days. I don't want to start cursing on the air, just regardless of how angry this kind of nonsense makes me personally. So aside from the fact there's no factual basis for these claims, there's one giant detail that people who are many of whom historically and today are Christians, who really should know better. And some of the more extremist Muslims are also make this claim. But the Christians should know better, because the Christian Bible includes the books of the Jewish Bible. Now, the most well-known parts of kosher law, the laws regarding dietary restriction, are probably no pork, no shellfish, things of that nature. There are two other laws that aren't talked about as often, some of which are important parts of kosher, and why you need a kosher, why there are kosher butchers and things of that nature, and why there are the symbols on packaged foods. By the way, there's another common myth that the symbol, the K, that you'll find on many packaged foods is a secret Jew tax companies pay. It's not. Under kosher law, there are specific requirements about food, and how it's packaged, making sure it's packaged properly to maintain. And this all relates, in large part, a lot of Jewish law in general is very practical, and it relates to making sure food remains safe and fresh, and things of that nature. That means that it is approved as kosher food. It means that that Orthodox and Hasidic and other sects that religiously follow kosher law can acceptably eat that food. That is all that it means. There is no secret tax. That said, to get back on the point, two other really important aspects of dietary law here relate specifically to how animals that you can eat are treated. Both of which actually serve very practical purposes. One is that, and my animal lover friends out there should approve of this, the animal must be killed quickly and painlessly. As I understand it, the current preferred method is a nail basically fired right into the base of the brain, which is is largely instantaneous and largely painless. But it is seen as absolutely crucial that the animal doesn't suffer. This serves a religious purpose because, yes, in Judaism, as in Christianity, man was given dominion over the earth, but we're also that again the Jewish concept of being the chosen people, giving you higher responsibility, not higher privilege. As the stewards of the earth, we are expected to show respect to the earth. So killing an animal torturing an animal unnecessarily is seen as displeasing to God. And I personally, as a Christian, have no problem with this concept whatsoever. I think animals should be killed. Well, I have no problem with the concept of eating meat. Animals should be killed humanely. So that's one part of it. The other part of it that makes the whole blood libel thing completely ridiculous is the Bible explicitly forbids the consumption of blood. This is Old Testament law, people. When an animal is killed to be kosher food, all of the blood has to be drained out of it. That is part of the law. To say that Jews are consuming blood, human or otherwise, as part of their religious ritual is not only ridiculously offensive, it would be a violation of their own law. The people that take religious law very seriously aren't going to break this law. It's a myth. It's a myth that should be dead. But stupid people perpetuate it. There are a bunch of other myths about Judaism, and we could do a whole episode about various anti-Semitic myths that just won't die. Another one that's very prominent, and I expect when I get into a full proper episode just on the Holocaust, it's going to come up again, is a document known as the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. It is a set of, what's the word I'm looking for? Of protocols, for lack of a better word, for world domination. Supposedly, the great leaders of Judaism got together and formulated somewhere around 100 years ago. This idiotic idea, and I'm going to get into why it's idiotic in a minute, has directly caused horrific tragedy. When the Nazis justified the Holocaust and justified the disgusting things that they did to the Jews, they cited this document. Henry Ford printed and distributed 500 copies of this nonsense. It's been, and that was during the 1920s. The Times of London in 1921 publicly pronounced the thing as nonsense. It's so widely available today in multiple languages, in print and on the internet, and continues to be presented by some idiots as a real document. Okay, so apparently it's believed that this text was basically textual evidence says it could not have been produced prior to 1901. Now here's the kicker. Here's the kicker with this moronic text. There is a book. Let me look it up because I want to get the right name. Here we go. There's a book called originally written in French, called The Dialogue in Hell Between Machiavelli and Montesquieu. This book was a political satire written by French attorney Maurice Joy in protest of the regime of Napoleon III, aka Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. It was a literary device. It was dialogue between the ancient Roman writer Lucian, and specifically it was a discussion with Charles Montesquieu and Niccolo Machiavelli, where they disputed politics. The concepts in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion are clear, which was a Russian-made forgery for a matter of record. Basically, it shamelessly plagiarized this dialogue in hell. All of these concepts that supposedly the learned elders came up with were brought up in this dialogue. Um, it's older text. All the concepts are brought up. It has no association with the Jews. And a bunch of racists in the early 20th century plagiarized the book to demonize the Jewish people. The stupidity of this is mind-boggling. So, Judaism. That's a very rough overview. I will put links in the description for those of you who wish to research further, and I encourage you to do so. I can only barely begin to cover these religions. As much as I love them and as fascinating as I find them, and as much respect as I have for all of them. And be clear, it's when I say how much I respect the religions, I don't just mean Judaism and Christianity. I mean Islam, I mean Hinduism, I mean Buddhism, Taoism. I respect religious belief in all of its forms. I may not agree with people, but I still respect the right to their beliefs and the value of their beliefs. There are bad things that every religion has done, but there are good things that every religion has done. But at any rate, so let's talk a little bit about the concept of Messiah, which is the defining difference between Judaism and Christianity. Judaism is waiting for a Messiah. Messiah is also translated, the word Christ, in fact, people call Jesus Christ, is a translation into Greek of the word Messiah from Hebrew, meaning the anointed one. The Messiah returns to save the Jewish people. What's interesting conceptually in this, there's a bunch of there are many requirements the Messiah has to meet to be the Messiah, and then there's the giant requirement. He has to be born to the line of King David. Jesus presents an interesting case here. His mother Mary was of the line of David. The Gospels lay out his genealogy in exhaustive detail. Mark, I want to say Matthew and Luke specifically. One of which explicitly says it's the genealogy of Joseph. The other one is not specifically mentioned, and most people consider it the genealogy of Mary. In Jewish tradition, to be Jewish, your mother has to be Jewish, or you have to convert. So, if your dad's Jewish and your mother's not, you're not Jewish. But while the line of Jewish heritage is matrilineal, the line, just like in most Western culture, the line of succession for a king is patrilineal. Your dad has to be, to be king, your dad has to have been king. Jesus doesn't technically qualify because Jesus is the son of God, not the son of Joseph. Which raises its own complex and fascinating questions. But that's one of the problems. There are a number of other ones, and there's a considerable debate about whether they are actually prophecies regarding Messiah or they are misunderstandings of various historical events and other factors. Generally speaking, in Christianity, when they talk about the prophecies of Messiah, they talk about being of the heir to the line of David, which is you have to. The idea of a Messiah is the Messiah is the king of the Jews, and we're going to come back to this concept when we talk about the crucifixion. But to be, that's what gives the Messiah the authority. Generally speaking, they're supposed to have been born under specific signs. There's interpretations in terms of how many generations removed they are from various important figures in Judaism, including Abraham and David and things like that. All of which debatably can be applied to Jesus Christ. And I'm not going to get into whether Jesus was the true Messiah or not, because I'm trying to factually present information about what people believe, not make judgment calls. The critical sticking point between Judaism and Christianity, more so than whether or not Jesus is of the line of David, is that when the Messiah, in Jewish interpretations of prophecy, when the Messiah returns, he will defeat the enemies of the Jews and set up their kingdom on earth. They will be delivered once and for all. Jesus, while a remarkable man, and in some sects of Judaism, he's considered a great moral teacher. Some even consider him a prophet. Most forms of Judaism do not consider him Messiah, though apparently from my reading, there are a few sects of Judaism that consider Jesus the Messiah of the Gentiles, just not of the Jews. But the bottom line is, whether you believe Jesus was Messiah or not, the world peace has not been achieved. He is not on the throne. Did not take a throne in Jerusalem. He hasn't, in the mind of most Jews, he has not fulfilled the basic requirement of being Messiah. Christians dispute this and interpret prophecy differently. It's the large point of contention between the two faiths. And it's here's another interesting thing. That the contentions, the things that really define Christianity as a separate religion, don't come from Jesus. Through early Christianity, through the 12 apostles, through Jesus himself, through the early leaders of the church under the original surviving apostles after the suicide of Judas Iscariot, Christians were considered a sect of Judaism. Christians considered themselves a sect of Judaism. Jews considered themselves a sect of Judaism. There are still, and I have a very good friend by the name of Trudy F. At her request, I'm not using her full name, who is a member of this group. But there's a whole sect between Judaism and Christianity, and there's debate. Some Jews don't consider them Christian. They consider them Christian, not Jewish. Some consider them Jewish. Some Christians consider them Jewish and not Christian. It's all over the map. But there is a sect of Judaism, a sect known as Messianic Jews, or Jews for Jesus, that accept that Jesus was the Messiah, prophesied Messiah. But what makes them different from other forms of Christianity is, other than that rather significant disagreement of doctrine, they follow Jewish law. They acknowledge Jewish feast days. They honor Sabbath on Saturday instead of Sunday. In most other ways, they're very similar to Judaism, except for this main difference. And again, pretty much the main point, the two main things to distinguish the two as separate religions would be, one, St. Paul. St. Paul being the late, now considered an apostle, but he wasn't one of the original apostles. He converted to the Christian faith after the death of Christ. When he saw, basically, he was persecuting Christians for the Roman authorities, and he was given a vision of Jesus, where Jesus had asked him why he was persecuting him. And Saul became Paul, and Paul became St. Paul. But his changes, when he stopped requiring the following of kosher law, and in fairness, there is a biblical precedent for no longer following kosher law for Christians based on the teachings of Jesus himself. But still, before Paul, most Christians were still following kosher. Most Christians were still requiring circumcision for conversion. And by and large, Christians still saw themselves as a sect of Judaism. His changes, his reforms, started the split. The split, interestingly enough, I've seen an argument for, and I generally agree, the split is a great favor the Jewish people did the Christians. You're probably wondering why I say this. Well, the thing people don't necessarily realize is in the 1st century AD, Christianity was by no means unique. There were other people that claimed to be Messiah. There were other sects of there were Pharisees and many other sects of Judaism out there. In 63 AD, I want to say, the Romans destroyed the temple. Most of the sects of Judaism that existed before then don't exist anymore. That distinction may have helped Christianity continue to survive. Okay, so enough of the history of the split between Judaism and Christianity. Let's talk about the Christian faith. Of the 3 religions I've talked about so far, in many ways, the hardest to pin down is Christianity. Just because there's such a breadth of Christian viewpoints. But early Christianity, and you can go. I'm not going to get into a long, detailed discussion of the history of the historical nature of Jesus and his teachings. Feel free to go reference my other videos on the subject, where I go into detail about the evidence for Christ. But that said, early Christianity would later evolve largely into what we broadly at the time would be called Catholicism. Not Roman Catholicism, Catholicism. That distinction comes literally 1,000 years later. That said, Orthodox Christianity, particularly Eastern Orthodoxy, which is what's primarily practiced in Russia and Eastern Europe and Greece, and Roman Catholicism, which is what's run by the Pope, and we're going to get into the difference down the line tonight, generally speaking, argue between the two of them who's older, which came first. What's interesting is, historically speaking, the oldest known sects of Christianity still practiced in the world are not the forms practiced in Russia, not the forms practiced in Greece, not the form practiced in Italy. It would either be the Coptic Church, which is also sometimes known as the Egyptian Orthodox Church, which is Egyptian, as the name would imply, or the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The problem being, both of them are so old and developed very close to the same time in 2 different locations, no one knows which one's older. That's very much a question historians can't answer. At any rate, Christianity in general, Christianity acknowledges Jesus Christ as the Messiah prophesied in the Old Testament. Most if not all Christian sects take that a step further and say that Jesus is himself divine. Mainstream Christianity, particularly Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, believe that, and actually most Protestant sects believe that Jesus is God. You have God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. But the 3 are the same being in some sense, and theologians have been arguing over how God could be both 3 beings and 1 being at the same time for almost 2,000 years now. But this dates back to the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century. Well, the formal decision that made most... let me back that up a second. But they're seen as the same, and the various verses in the Bible that support this, yet different. Which is an idea that is antithetical to both Jewish and Islamic thought, because both Judaism and Islam are strictly monotheistic. There is one God and only one God, and no other way to interpret that one God than indivisible and eternal. But particularly Christians generally, again, this does vary from sect to sect, believe that Jesus came not to save man from physical evil. They believe he will return at some point in the future, which is Revelation and Judgment Day and the Apocalypse. But that day hasn't come. He's come to save us from sinful behavior, which leads us into the Christian concepts of heaven and hell and judgment and damnation. And that's the important step. But the vast majority of people who identify themselves as Christian place on Jesus' role. There are undoubtedly Christians that will watch this at some point and go, wait, but, because again, Christianity is exceptionally difficult to pin down and go, this is what all Christians are, because there's you can't even get half the time you can't even get all the sects of Christianity to agree which ones are and aren't Christian. But Christianity as what's interesting, I think, is when most people think about Christianity dividing, they think of the Protestant Reformation, started by, of course, Martin Luther, which is the 16th century. Actually, the church had a split about 500 years before Martin Luther was even born, which is also commonly called the Great Schism, which happened in 1054 AD, although there was a great deal that built up to the Great Schism for literally centuries. But the Great Schism was basically, or schism, I guess, actually, to pronounce it properly, of 1054 is the point when the Catholicism as a grand whole, because the word Catholic actually means universal, divided. And you got Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, which are extremely similar. They are not interchangeable by any stretch of the imagination, but they are very similar to each other and agree on a lot of doctrinal points. One of the biggest differences, and it's not the only difference, but one of the biggest differences is that, of course, the Roman Catholic Church acknowledges the Bishop of Rome, commonly referred to as the Pope, as the highest religious authority on earth. Orthodoxy acknowledges some of them, but does not currently acknowledge the supremacy of the Pope. They see the Pope as the Bishop of Rome, which is an important religious position, but he does not have that overall authority over Christianity, over them, that he does over the Roman Catholic Church. Both generally see that their line of priests are in a succession coming from the apostles, which is something that separates them from the most, but not all, Protestant sects. They also accept the Deuterocanonicals, which are books of the Bible that are about that are not accepted by Judaism or Protestantism usually. And to answer Anthony Cotto in the chat, who's a little confused about what's going on, so in general tonight is a discussion of the history, religion, and some of the various dark practices of Judaism and Christianity. The first hour was dedicated to Judaism. We have now moved into Christianity. It's part of an ongoing segment of videos I do highlighting the beliefs, history, and various practices, both questionable and otherwise, of the major world religions. Last week was a discussion of Islam. This week is Judaism and Christianity. Next time which will probably be either the end of February or beginning of March, will be a discussion of Buddhism and Hinduism, followed by a discussion of Taoism. But back on topic. So that's the first big split is these two. Now, a lot of the things we associate with Catholicism are still part of Orthodoxy. They believe in the Assumption of Mary. They agree that in her special state, they do not see her as, they don't believe that she was conceived without sin, because Orthodoxy rejects the Catholic idea of the original sin, that everyone is born in the sins of Mary, had to be born under special circumstances. Both sides see her as extremely important as the mother of Jesus, first among the saints. Generally accept that she was remained a virgin, which Protestants, of course, do not. They both recognize 7 sacraments. In Orthodoxy, they're known as baptism, chrismation, which is essentially similar to confirmation, or the bar mitzvah ritual in Judaism. It's basically the point when a child steps into responsibility within the church. The Eucharist, which of course we know as communion. Holy orders, which is becoming a priest. Holy unction, which is last rites. Marriage, which I'm sure I don't need to explain, and penance or confession. The list is not fixed in Orthodoxy. It is fairly consistent within Roman Catholicism. The two have a long and complicated history in terms of politics and how they relate to each other, but they do share common beliefs. They both saints, and that's another concept I'll need to get into as this discussion continues, as a concept in both, where it's not generally a concept in most, or at least not a concept in the same way that it is within Catholicism in most Protestant sects. But many of the saints recognized by the Roman Catholic Church are also recognized by the Orthodox Church, and vice versa. The ones that the other ones do not recognize in both cases. Another really critical difference, and this will segue, I think, fairly well into getting into the other big schism in Christianity, which would be the creation of Protestantism, which is the nature of salvation, of what gets you into heaven. In Catholicism and Orthodoxy, it's considered a combination of faith in God and Jesus Christ and the Bible, and deed. You can't. It's not either or. You can't have faith without works. You can have works without faith. And there is biblical precedent for both of these points. The Bible does say that we are redeemed by faith, not works, so that no man may boast. But it also does say that faith without works is dead. Protestants, on the other hand, believe that we are saved. Generally, believe that we are saved by faith, not by works. That works are that if you have faith, your works will come. But it's all about faith, not about deed. Whereas in Catholicism, it's both, which leads to the concept of purgatory, which has to a degree fallen out of favor within even Catholicism. But you have heaven and hell, where the righteous go to heaven, the wicked go to hell. Then you have the middle ground to a point, which is purgatory. And purgatory, it's not quite the middle ground. Catholics in particular have this concept of what they call venial and mortal sins. Mortal sins are things that will send you directly to hell for committing them. They're the big ones, murder, things of that nature. Venial sins are lesser sins. You need to confess them. You need to do penance for them. If you do not, you wind up going to purgatory to pay off the debt of your sin. and that's where purgatory comes from. And the thing that's important to realize in the Catholic concept of purgatory is it's heaven's waiting room. You go to purgatory to deal with the consequences of your actions in life, to purify you for heaven. You do not go to purgatory. No one who goes to purgatory is going to wind up going to hell in Catholic dogma. It doesn't work that way. It's a state of purging, hence purgatory, your sins and the punishment for those sins. Protestants, of course, reject this concept entirely, believing it's a either all or nothing thing. You either go to heaven or you go to hell. Your payment for your sins was done by Christ, so you don't need to do this. So I keep talking about the differences between these sects and Protestantism. So real briefly, let's talk about the Protestants. Like I said, the first big schism within the Catholic Church was in 1054 when the Orthodox, the eastern side of the church, split off and became an completely independent force. There are other schisms that have happened. Most notably, of course, would be King Henry VIII splitting away and creating Anglicanism. Originally, primarily, and this is not condemnation of Anglicans or Episcopals, which is the American version of Anglicans, but in all honesty, the main reason that Henry split off to create his own church, where the King of England is the ultimate authority, is because he wanted to get a divorce from his wife, and the church wouldn't allow it. But the next big, really major split, and the point where most of the literally thousands of denominations of Christianity that exist in the world come into the picture, is in the 16th century with Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a Roman Catholic priest. What's really important to understand about Luther is that originally he wasn't trying to start a new denomination. He wasn't trying to divide the church. He was trying to reform the church. He presented 95 arguments about the way the church was handling things, particularly relating to the idea of people being able to, by the way, but to donate money to the church to reduce their time in purgatory. And thank you, Anthony. I appreciate the kind words. But he objected to this idea. They call it pecuniary indulgences. I'm generally not a giant fan of it either, and for that matter, the Catholic Church has largely abandoned the concept. But you could because you can't really. It's not biblical to say you can buy your way into heaven. Which isn't to say that donation of money is not a good and wonderful thing. It is. It's just that it doesn't, theologically, that doesn't work. Which is why the church has largely abandoned it. While they do continue to strongly encourage people to donate, and there are a number of wonderful Catholic and other Christian charitable organizations in the world today and throughout history. But that's where the split came. And then as eventually Protestants began with Luther, they divided into the many, many other sects we know today: Baptists, Lutherans, Presbyterians. There are literally thousands of denominations of Christianity in the world. I don't have all night to go. I don't have all week to go through all of them. I don't even have enough time to go through half of them. I'm going to talk again briefly about two other denominations that are somewhat the odd Christians out, just because their beliefs are unusual enough that I think it merits discussion, which would be the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons. But on the whole, those are your two major divisions within Christianity. First, the Orthodox, and then the Protestants. Generally speaking, the relationship between the three branches of Christianity is stormy, to say the least. To slightly touch on politics in an indirect way, because I don't want to get into the mess that it is, friends of mine on Facebook have posted a thing about the Pope commenting on Donald Trump being Christian. I am not going to weigh in one way or the other on his Christian faith. This is not a show about politics, and that is far too much like politics. What I want to address instead is the idea that some people have put forward the Pope is the ultimate authority on who is and is not Christian. With all due respect to Pope Francis and to the papacy as a concept, because I have respect for what many of the popes have done. I like some of the things many of the things Francis has done, particularly with his emphasis on forgiveness and salvation rather than condemnation. So I don't necessarily want to condemn him in any way. That said, the Pope is the final authority on the Roman Catholic faith, that denomination of Christianity. Protestants haven't accepted papal authority on who is and isn't Christian for hundreds of years. The Orthodox for almost 1,000 now. So saying, well, the Pope says he's Christian, so he's Christian, is doing a disservice to the larger nature of Christianity and the fact that there are a number of Protestant sects that don't even accept that Catholics are Christian. And in fairness, there's, while it is less common in the church as a whole, there have historically and remained in some of the more conservative branches Catholics that don't consider Protestants Christians. It's a really complicated issue to say who is and isn't Christian, particularly when you throw the political aspect into it, which is why this is as far down this particular the road of Donald Trump's political views as I am ever going to go on this show. This is a show about the paranormal and about religion and spirituality. It's not a show about politics, and I will not allow it to become a show about politics. If you want to know my opinions on politics, I have some. And on the whole, I hate politics. That's about all I want to say on air as a point of professionalism and in the continuing desire to not alienate people of other viewpoints. Because I don't want to do that. I want to appeal to people. I think I have something to say that people should listen to, and I don't want to alienate people who disagree with me on something that doesn't relate to the message I'm trying to get across. So as I've said many times on the show, and as I've said tonight, I myself am Christian. I want to say, because this is very important to me, I was raised Roman Catholic, as I've mentioned before. I am not a Roman Catholic. I do not consider myself Protestant. I do not consider myself Orthodox. I just consider myself Christian. I do not get involved. I try to avoid the doctrinal disputes that happen between the various denominations. I have respect for the denominations of Christianity. I think there are many wonderful things that are being done by just about all major sects of Christianity. Even some of the minor sects that are doing crazy things have done good things in the past. Fred Phelps and the Westboro Baptist Church are, in my opinion, horrible human beings. That said, back in the day, Fred Phelps himself was a civil rights attorney who did a lot of good for people. I do not approve of how they treat of the hate they give towards soldiers and the hate they give towards homosexuals. I at the same time do not want to ignore the greater historical role that they have played. And other sects and even other extremists, even some of the more extreme aspects of Christianity, have done good things in the past. They aren't inherent. I reject the idea of labeling entire groups of people evil. There are evil individuals in every religion, which is another point I am trying to reiterate throughout these discussions of religion. You'll notice, I've talked about extremists within Islam. I've talked about extremists within Judaism. I just discussed my feelings about the Westboro Baptist Church. There are other Christian sects, and there are other things Christians have done throughout history and do today that I do not approve. I in no way approve of. but I do not condemn, because here's the other thing, and I'm going to get a little personal here because I'm talking about my religious beliefs, so I feel like I should, if only in the sense of full disclosure, but also on a personal level, I want to talk about what I believe. To me, the core point of Christianity, and the reason why I consider myself Christian, is a message of forgiveness and salvation. It is a message that every human being, no matter what you've done, has a potential to be forgiven. That to me is a core principle of my Christian faith. Another core principle of my Christian faith is the idea that the two primary laws, and this is what Jesus Christ himself said, the two primary laws in how I and other Christians should live their lives is, one, love God, and two, love thy neighbor as thyself, which is not a uniquely Christian concept. Every religion in the world has a form of the golden rule. There's a story, and it's a story I like about Judaism, and it's a concept I think Christians should remember because it should be part of our own faith. But there's a story of a Jewish rabbi who was told, "I will convert to Judaism if you can explain your entire faith while standing on one foot." He stands on one foot, declares, do not do to another what you would find hateful to have done unto yourself. All of the rest is just commentary. And the man converts. I will not, by choice and design, I will not discuss damnation. I will not condemn homosexuals. I will not condemn non-Christians. I will not condemn people and say that they are going to hell. Partly because because judgment is to God, is given to God alone, and I am not God, nor am I a prophet. And partly because we are told to love our neighbor. And more significantly, we are told to love our enemy, to pray for those who wrong us. And I personally do not feel that judgment and condemnation is in keeping with that. I will, that said, I do believe in calling people on their BS. I will get off my rear end and say that no, murder is wrong. Biblically speaking as well, and I think this is another concept that's important for Christians to remember. The Bible says that whosoever hateth their brother, and in some translation it goes further to say without cause, but it says whosoever shall hateth their brother is a murderer. And no murderer. This is 1 John 3:15. Let me get the King James. There we go. So King James Bible, other translations are very similar. Whosoever hateth his brother is a murderer, and ye know no murderer hath eternal life abiding in him. The message of Christ is one of salvation and redemption, not condemnation. And I think that gets lost. And this is one of the reasons, as I said, while I do not consider myself Catholic, I do approve of many of the things Francis is doing. Particularly, I approve of his message that he is focusing us again on the message of salvation. So that's my personal take on the subject. I think that people should that it is our duty as both as Christians and as human beings, to treat our fellow humans as compassionately as Okay, so the video apparently isn't working. I'm going to... It'll probably kick back in a minute. I'm having a bit of connection problems on my end. That may very well be what's going on. But that to me is the core of what I believe, and that is what to me is the most important point, is redemption, salvation, forgiveness, and love. This is why I will not condemn people for their... You will never hear me saying non-Christians are going to hell, or that homosexuals are wicked, or anything like that, because that is contrary to the message. Aside from being contrary to the message I am trying to promote with the show, I believe foremost in love, redemption, and forgiveness, as Christ himself taught, and that hatred is... I do in fact believe that hatred is equivalent to murder. So now that I've cheerleaded for Christianity, let's own up and be grown-ups and admit the fact that there are things that Christians have done historically and to today that I don't approve of. Throughout history, various sects of Christianity have engaged in forcible conversion. People have been killed for not accepting Christian faith. In the various invasions of Europe, I could argue this and point to other religions that have had similar practices, and the persecution of Christians by non-Christians, particularly in our early history. But that none of it, one evil does not justify another. The Christian majority, as it exists today, isn't engaging in these practices. There are certainly Christians still in the world that practice forcible conversion, but you don't find a Roman... the Pope is not currently calling for an army to march on any country in the world and kill everyone who won't convert to Roman Catholicism. You don't even hear the Baptists organizing an army, even if some of the most extreme members of various sects might talk about the idea. Also, historically speaking, you have issues with how Catholics have treated Protestants and vice versa. Slavery certainly was upheld by Christians for a very long time. Various hate groups in the United States today have claimed to be Christian in faith, particularly the Ku Klux Klan, and then try and turn around and use the Bible to justify their various opinions. I've already talked about Westboro Baptist Church and what they're doing, in my opinion, thereof. There is also... Okay, I'm going to hit another elephant in the room. One other thing I don't approve of, and this is a little political, which I apologize for, but I think it's worth saying. There is a current debate about the teaching of evolution in schools. I have no problem with people who choose to believe in creationism, or intelligent design, if you want to call it that. I have no problem in people who want to believe in young Earth creationism, the idea that the Earth was created 6,000 years ago. Those people's right to believe these things is enshrined within the First Amendment. Attacking their right to believe it, their right to teach it in church or teach it in the home, is morally wrong and is a violation of U.S. law. The highest U.S. law, because this is what the Constitution itself says. All of that said, evolution is the leading scientific theory. And while some Christians see it as incompatible with Christian faith, that is not universally true. Which is something else I want to address, because the relationship between Christianity and science is widely misunderstood, including by Christians, and more complex than people think it is. People tend to think of Christianity as being anti-science. Particularly, they will point to the Flat Earth Society that believes against against all evidence that the Earth is in fact flat. Yes, people really believe this. Trust me, I've done the research. It gives me a headache. Um, or people that absolutely reject the possibility of evolution or the Big Bang or various other theories in science. On the other side of the coin, the largest denomination of Christianity in the world would be Roman Catholicism. The theory that we now call the Big Bang, as I've talked about before in my episode on religion and science and magic and the complex relationship between the three, was proposed by a Roman Catholic priest. The first time the Catholic Church ever made an official pronouncement on evolution was in 1950 when Pope Pius XII said that he felt there was no conflict between evolution and the biblical idea of creation, and while he didn't embrace evolution outright, he encouraged scientists to continue to investigate the subject and search for more evidence. This was later further affirmed by both Pope John Paul II and Pope Francis, who have in the fact that evolution is now considered part of Catholic catechism, that God created the universe, the Big Bang and evolution are the means by which he has done so. Christianity and science are not mutually exclusive. They should not be mutually exclusive. This is a very complicated and long subject, but I would also particularly like to point to something that Galileo Galilei himself pointed out when discussing the complexities of the heliocentric versus geocentric universe models, which was the principle that when our understanding of Scripture and the facts that we have learned about the universe come into conflict, we shouldn't reject fact, we should reevaluate our understanding of Scripture. As a Christian, I believe Scripture is the Word of God, and God is infallible. On the other hand, our ability to interpret that Word is not. We can point to all sorts of times that the Bible has been used to justify horrible things throughout history, as times that people have misunderstood what the Bible has to say. I believe so. When it comes to the teaching of evolution in schools, I firmly believe that evolution belongs in the science class, and religious belief does not. And yes, I include intelligent design within that umbrella. I will say, and I think this is also an important proviso, I do believe that religion should be taught in schools. Now, a common thing non-Christians will counter when I say something like this is, well, do you mean your religion or other religions? And the answer is I believe all religions should be taught in schools. I think a serious concerted effort should be made in public schools to factually educate students on the beliefs of the various religions of the world. I don't mean we should indoctrinate them into a religious belief or encourage them to believe in one religion, because I believe in freedom of religion and I believe in the freedom to be an atheist. What I mean is that people should be aware. I think it is beneficial for people to be educated on the basic tenets of world religion. What do Hindus believe? What do Buddhists believe? What do Taoists believe? What do Christians believe? What do Jews believe? What do Muslims believe? A basic understanding of that promotes greater tolerance, which is, as I've said, this is the entire point of me doing these videos, is to educate people on these beliefs. Particularly, if nothing else, because if you're going to make a decision, become a religious person, whether you choose to become Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist or any other faith, or you choose to become atheist or agnostic, I think there is an inherent intellectual value in making an informed choice on the matter. Be aware of what you're accepting and rejecting. Be aware of your other options. Don't just accept an idea or reject an idea because your parents said accept or reject the idea. And also, you're going to have to interact with these people. Islam is, in particular, is the fastest growing religion in the world. There are millions of Jews. There are millions of Hindus and Buddhists and other religious faiths all over the world. You're going to come into contact with these people. The more you understand about their beliefs and their culture, the easier it is to respect and get along with them. whether it be as simple as realizing don't offer your Muslim or Jewish friend bacon, or as complicated as realizing some of the commonalities and ethical beliefs across the religious spectrum. That is what I mean when I say that I believe that religious education should be part of schools, because I explicitly am not saying that any single religion should be given favor in any way, shape, or form. Just that people should be given factual, objective information about what religion believes to promote understanding and greater cooperation and tolerance across the board. And again, I am not condemning, or I am not. Well, I've been clear on my own faith. By these videos, that is my goal, is to inform. I am not trying to champion or to dismiss anyone's religious beliefs. Hopefully, I continue to hope I am not doing so. If I have one prayer with all of this, is that I don't offend people of the faiths I am discussing, because that would be, again, be contrary to my point. I am trying to be educational and informative. Let's see, is there anything else I want to cover? I think I've covered things fairly well. There's a couple of subjects within Christianity that I haven't discussed, I guess, with because it detracted from my point. But the other thing I want to say about Christianity, and this is true of other faiths and the things that they have done wrong throughout history, is a lot of the time what you think Christians have done wrong historically is more complicated than Christians went out and did this bad thing because they were Christian. There are things that are done. Many crimes have been done in the name of Christianity. The reason, humans being humans, reasons are usually more complex than black and white. I'll give you two concise examples of the point, which you can find other episodes on here that discuss with Drew, who's a historian, Norse Reconstructionist pagan and a historian. But one would, of course, be the Crusades, a series of wars fought between Christianity and Roman Christianity in various other countries, primarily in the Middle East, although they also did a horrific crusade into the Balkan states within Europe, which was pretty much in its entirety excommunicated, which would tell you how terrible they were. But the Crusade, people point at the Crusades as this horrible thing that Christians did. The truth is more complicated than that. There were horrible excesses in the Crusades, and I am not going to even attempt to deny that. But particularly the original, but how excessive and what was the right and wrong about it depends on which crusade you're talking about. If you're talking about the Balkan Crusade, it was pretty horrible. If you're talking about the Children's Crusade, oh dear heavens. If you're talking about the First Crusade, what got the whole thing started, there were some legitimate political points there. The First Crusade started partly in response to a legitimate threat, because Christian pilgrims traveling through the Holy Land were being accosted by Muslims. Be they bandits, for a variety of reasons, and because I don't want to demonize Muslims in this matter, the Muslims that were doing the accosting had some legitimate points, because one of the concerns that they had is you had Christians that were coming to the Holy Land as honest pilgrims who meant no harm, and then you had other groups of con men and things like that that were selling fake relics and doing other dubious and criminal behavior that the Muslims wanted to stop. And I think I don't particularly approve of con artists. But the problem was sometimes it was very difficult to tell the difference between the pilgrims and the con artists, which was creating problems, which is part of the reason for the crusade. Another part of the reason was that, the Byzantine Empire, which is Orthodox, and the Roman Catholic Church have a long, complicated, and tempestuous, to say the least, history. They were generally allies, particularly at the time of the First Crusade, and the Byzantine Empire specifically asked the Roman Catholic Church to intercede because of the problems they were having with the Muslims. So the crusade served the purpose of helping an established ally and helping pilgrims who were having legitimate problem on peaceful pilgrimages to the land, whether or not that problem was legitimate. Another really good example of my point that often religion is more of an excuse for atrocity than an actual cause is the Salem witch trials. The European witch trials are a very complicated subject, and you can't decisively talk about the reasons for all of the European witch trials because you're talking about a period that spans literally hundreds of years and multiple countries and motivations, and it goes back and forth on the reasons, some of which are understandable and very political, some of which fall in other categories. But the Salem trials is a very specific period of time, very specific individuals involved, and we understand pretty well what was actually happening. For those of you who are unaware, if you look through court records and you look at the original history of the families that made the accusations of witchcraft, because specifically it was 9 children from different families, they accused mostly women and some men of witchcraft. But if you look at the families of those children, and you look at the original people that were accused, you can find disputes over land there. The two sides arguing over who owned which piece of property. Now, under the laws at the time, if you're accused of witchcraft, your lands become forfeit. Largely become forfeit. Giles Corey being a notable exception because he refused. But basically, either you plead guilty to witchcraft, in which case they're forfeit to the state, and you go to prison, or you plead innocent, you're found guilty, you're hanged, because Salem witches were hanged, not burned at the stake. That was Europe. And the property is forfeit to the state, which is a really horrible way of solving a property dispute. And a lot of the time, when you look at any supposedly religious atrocity in history, politics and greed tend to be underlying and fear. I should say fear has a lot to do with it as well. Usually irrational fear. A lot of racism is rooted in irrational fear of for example. But a lot of the big ones, when you look at the conquistadors and the horrific, inexcusable things that they did to the native Mesoamerican cultures, how large of a role religion played in it, we could argue and debate about. But there's no debating the fact the Aztecs in particular had a substantial amount of gold, and the conquistadors were greedy. You don't need religion to be greedy, folks. I don't think that's a great revelation. A lot of modern conflicts with religion, and this is true of Christianity and Islam and many of the other ones, religion is a reason why these things happen. Usually the causes of it are very, very political. A real good example of this, one of the most well-known religious conflicts of the 20th century, which is another giant political mess to wade into, but the conflict in Ireland between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland and Ireland is very political. To the point that even atheists on both sides tend to identify as Catholic or Protestant, even though they're atheists, simply because those are the terms that are used for the two sides of a political dispute that is going on, that is significantly more complicated than saying the whole thing's about religion. Religion, I'm not denying that religion plays a role and is a factor, but there's a political, to simply go, oh, it's about politics, is to completely ignore a massive political, economic, and other issues that factor into it. And again, this is not solely a defense of Christianity. It also holds true for Islam. It also holds true for all of the other faiths we're discussing and all the other horrible things that are done. There are reasons that go beyond religion why people do horrible things. And the ugly reality is that despite claims to the contrary, there are atheists that have done horrible things as well. And atheists will usually come back and say, well, atheists don't do that in the name of atheism. Yeah, that's true. Generally speaking, not a lot is done in the name of atheism, because atheism isn't a single thing. That being said, whether they say it's in the name of religion or not, the reality is the majority of religious people that do horrible things do it for secular reasons, not necessarily religious ones. There are crimes that do have there are crimes and atrocities that are religiously motivated, I'm sure, but often you're dealing with mental illness and other issues, not with normal. You're not dealing with normal, ordinary people of faith. The majority of people of faith, of all of the major faiths, and many of the minor ones, are reasonable people. There are jerks in every population. It's not fair to demonize. But okay, we've now actually hit our full second hour. I'm rather glad to say that we've actually gotten back to a 2-hour show again. And I think I'm just about done for the night. I want to thank everyone so much for listening. I will ask, if you did enjoy this, and you feel so inclined, liking, sharing, subscribing are an enormous help to my channel that don't cost a dime. If you don't want to, that's okay too. And if you don't like what I'm doing, if you feel I got something wrong in any of these episodes, please put a comment below. Please, I am by no means an absolute infallible source on any subject. And I do welcome constructive criticism. And if I got something wrong, please tell me so I can try and correct it in the future. I'm sure I have. But hopefully I have done a reasonably good job of presenting these faiths. And ideally, if I had one hope, it would be that people would watch this, get interested, and research the religions for themselves and educate yourself. There is so much more I can't even begin to cover, because I don't want to spend literally all night just talking about one religion. Because we're talking about religions that are thousands of years old with millions of adherents. It's far too complex to cover everything in a reasonable period of time. And it's a fascinating and rewarding subject to study in its own right. But just to do a quick recap on things that are coming with the show before I log out entirely for the night. Keep in mind, we've got a lot of really cool guests coming up. Well, I do promise I will be getting back to Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, and a final overview of religion. Oh, dang it, I did forget one thing. Or two things, in fact. Okay, let me scroll back and top off the discussion of monotheism and Judaism/Christianity before I move into other faiths entirely, which is, while the Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are seen as the three primary Abrahamic faiths, meaning that they consider themselves descendants of the teachings of Abraham. They are not the only ones. There is also the Baha'i faith, which considers itself Abrahamic. I honestly don't know enough about them to talk about them at length. There's a very interesting, fairly small sect called Macedonians, I don't know how to pronounce it, which accepts many of the prophets of the Old Testament, and then considers the final and greatest prophetic authority to be John the Baptist. Whereas on the other hand, they believe that both Jesus and Muhammad were false prophets. And they're also a dualistic religion, and they believe that if you remember from last week's episode, in the first half, dualism is two gods, equal but generally opposite, hence dual. But there's also Gnosticism, which is a whole other religion/sect of Christianity that has a very complicated relationship with Christianity throughout history. But with respect to any Gnostic friends out there who are watching this, it's a very complicated subject, and it's, to some extent, an actual separate faith that isn't in sheer numbers on as high as the ones I'm choosing to discuss. No disrespect is meant. But the last thing I was going to touch on very briefly is there are two sects within Christianity that are in some ways radically different than the others, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka the Mormons, and the Jehovah's Witnesses. Real brief, Mormons trace their beliefs back to a man by the name of Joseph Smith, who lived in New York and then eventually moved westward, who they believe was a prophet who was given golden discs written by ancient followers of Jesus Christ that lived in the New World among the native tribes, and in fact were supposed to have been one of the lost tribes of Israel. He was given them by the Archangel Moroni, which he then translated and became the Book of Mormon. It's an interesting sect, and it's very different than Christianity in the fact that where mainstream Christianity is monotheistic, Mormonism tends to be a little more polytheistic in the idea that Jesus and God, and even depending on your interpretation, the Holy Spirit, are separate deities, and that there are other deities and there are other saviors on other worlds, and it's and even potentially depending on interpretation, multiple deities, and that which is a whole can of worms I don't necessarily want to get into right now. And then Jehovah's Witnesses are the big difference. It's very similar to Christians. They're the ones, of course, you get knocking on your door. Most people in the United States have probably had this experience. I have many times in my life. They accept Jesus as Messiah. Some of their biggest differences of opinions are, one, not seeing Jesus as inherently part of God the Father. The other is in the interpretation that there is no eternal punishment. Instead, those judged wicked will be annihilated. They will cease to exist. And which is annihilationism, which is also common in some Protestant sects as well. But it's the differences of opinion on hell is in the fact they don't believe it exists is a rather large difference. I will say one of the things I personally find interesting about Jehovah's Witnesses relates to the Holocaust. Now, by far, as we all know, the largest victims of the Holocaust were Jews. Jews were not the only victims of the Holocaust. It's just 6 million Jews were killed, and somewhere estimates range between 3 and 6 million non-Jews were killed, which covers everything from Romani, disabled people, Roman Catholics, Freemasons, and Jehovah's Witnesses, and many other groups. Oh, and communists are actually another big part of it, and homosexuals. And at any rate, what I find interesting with Jehovah's Witnesses is because of their beliefs on the government and government authority, they were actually considered enough of a threat by the Nazi government to be sent to the camps and required to wear a purple triangle to signify them as Jehovah's Witnesses. 1 second, let me double check that because I feel like I'm making a mistake. But the Nazis persecuted them, particularly because they were unwilling to accept the authority of the state. They were required to wear a specific symbol. What made the Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's estimated about 1,000 Germans and about 400 from other countries were killed, which is among the lower numbers of people that were killed. But what made them, it was purple triangles. Okay, I was right. But what made them unusual among the people in the camps is a Jehovah's Witness could leave a concentration camp at almost any time as long as they signed a formal renunciation of their faith. They refused to, and over 100,000 of them were executed for their courage to stand up for their beliefs. I have the utmost respect for that. One other topic that just occurred to me I overlooked would be the concepts of saints. which is a common misunderstanding about about Catholicism and Orthodoxy, which is that people believe that Catholics and Orthodox worship saints, which isn't the way that isn't accurate to the way that they see it. Okay, as a point of clarification, a saint in Christian tradition is a person in heaven. Any Christian believer in heaven is automatically a saint. This is part of Catholic dogma, as well as Orthodox dogma, as well as Protestant dogma. The difference is that saints, as recognized by Orthodoxy and Catholicism, are people that have led exemplary lives and have shown direct evidence of miracles, both in life and critically in people praying for intercession. Praying for intercession is where people get this idea that Catholics worship saints. They don't. Santeria does, which is why Santeria actually means the worship of the saints. But you pray to a saint. You don't ask the saint to do something for you. You're asking the saint to intercede with God to do something for you. Many Christians disagree with this because they believe Jesus is the only intercessor between God and man. The way I've always understood it is that the idea of praying to the saint is less veneration in the sense that you treat God or Jesus, and more it's the idea of you have a person that you know is particularly holy, who's close to God because they're in heaven, who you are asking to pray for you. My understanding of it, and I may be wrong, is it's more akin to asking someone else to pray for you, except the person you're asking to pray for you is no longer among the living. This is certainly a matter of debate, but again, they're not venerating saints as divine figures. They're just as humans who have lived exemplary life, for the point of record to be recognized by the Catholic Church as a saint. And I assume Orthodoxy has a similar tradition on this. I don't know. You need to show at least 3 miracles, one of which has to happen during your life, one of which can happen during your lifetime, the other 2 of which have to happen after your death. The only way to completely circumvent the investigatory process I just outlined to demonstrate these miracles have occurred is to have died as a martyr to your faith. Anyone who has died for the sake of their Christian belief in Catholicism is considered a saint by default. This includes a number of important saints throughout history, including one of my personal favorites, which would be Saint Maximilian Kolbe, who was a saint, was a Polish priest, who hid, helped hide 4,000 people from the Nazis, 2,000 of whom were Jews. He was caught. He and his brothers and his order were sent to the concentration camps. He, in fact, went to Auschwitz itself. During his time at Auschwitz, there was an escape. The commandant of Auschwitz was a real bastard. If you've ever seen the movie Schindler's List, let me put it like this: the movie Schindler's List toned down some of the horrible things that he did. He was much worse than that, but Steven Spielberg and the other people behind the movie felt that showing the full extent of his sadistic, horrible nature would turn him into a cartoonish villain, and people wouldn't believe that a human had done all of these things. But what you see in the movie is true to life. He did those things. He just did much worse. At any rate, the decision was made to randomly kill 10 people from the one barracks. One of the 10, as the 10 were selected, one of them started screaming about his wife and his children, who were still alive. St. Maximilian Kolbe stands up and says, "Don't take him, take me. I'm just a worthless old priest." They acknowledged that. They let the married man go and took Kolbe instead. They stuck the 10 prisoners in starvation bunkers. Kolbe proceeded to drive the Nazis half mad by leading mass and and praying and singing with the other inmates. At the end of the month, he was taken out because starvation hadn't killed him yet, and they injected him with poison in an attempt to kill him, and then ultimately before he was quite dead yet, threw him in the crematoriums. He's an incredibly impressive figure, and the Catholic Church recognizes him as a martyr for the faith. And one of my favorite particular details is when Pope John Paul II formally canonized him, the man that Colby gave his life to save was there for the ceremony. So he succeeded. He saved that man's life, and that's actually pretty awesome. And it's just a great story of my point about sometimes great things are done in the name of God, as well as horrible. But I've already gone longer than I intended to and covered subjects I don't want to. So let me real quick fill you guys in on what's coming up in case you missed it at the beginning of the show. So the month of February is jam-packed with guests, folks. 8 to 10 p.m. next Monday, so this is February 6th, I'm going to have Stephen LaChance on. He's an author of several books, including The Uninvited and Blessed Are the Wicked, about paranormal phenomenon. He's appeared in multiple television shows. Specifically, we're going to be talking about his new book coming out the week of the 6th, in fact, which is Confrontation with Evil, which details his 10 years of research into the case of Roland Doe. Roland Doe was the 1949 exorcism case that inspired the legendary horror movie The Exorcist. You can if you look up the Llewellyn website, you can find an article he wrote about 10 things you didn't know about The Exorcist to get an idea of what's coming and find additional information on the book. Earlier in that day, I will be, and it's already scheduled, I'm going to be recording, and then later we're going to edit and we're going to put up online my interview with Leonard Balsera. Lenny, who works for Evil Hat Productions as an author. He wrote the Dresden Files role-playing game, which is based on the hit series of novels, also known as the Dresden Files, which is also the basis of a TV show. The books and the role-playing game deal extensively with the paranormal. You have demons, angels, ghosts, vampires, werewolves. It's a kitchen sink of paranormal phenomenon, beautifully written, well-researched. He's also working on the upcoming RPG Dresden Files Accelerated. And then the last one I have a confirmed date on, because I do have 3 more interviews I'm trying to schedule, and I'm not going to announce them until I actually have dates, and I'm sure that they're happening. But the last one, which is going to be on the 20th of February, is Matthew L. Swain. Matthew is a reporter who also is working as a research writer for Penn State. He has worked as both a reporter and a music reviewer, and is currently the author of a book called The Ghosts of Country Music, which is about hauntings related to famous country stars, both living and dead, and of various important notable places, radio stations, recording studios, various venues. And that's coming up on the 20th. Good question, Anthony. I actually currently film live videos, 1 to 2 hours of length every Monday. Do have some other projects in the works I'll be talking about as time comes on, but at the moment I do 1 video a week. Occasionally I'll do additional videos, which are usually what I call Forgotten Fairy Tales, which I need to get back to, in which I discuss various interesting but lesser known fairy tales from around the world. This is confirmed enough, I think I can start discussing it. At the end of February, or possibly the beginning of March, I'm going, as many of you know, both from my recent interview regarding East Texas University, I am a gamer. I play Dungeons & Dragons and things of that nature. I am, at the end of this month, going to start filming, in conjunction with my friendly local comic/gaming store, a series of videos of various paranormal and horror-themed role-playing games. This will not be replacing the current content you're getting, but will be in addition to, and hopefully be a little bit of fun. I'm going to base my games on various creepypastas, various experiences I've had as an investigator in various other famous cases throughout history. Hopefully you guys will be able to check that out. I would also, again, as I was saying, please like, comment, subscribe. If you have ideas for topics, feel free to email me. And if for that matter, if you're having paranormal experiences in your home and you need help, feel free to email me. I do actually work as an investigator. It is kevinm.paranormalencyclopedia, just like the show, at gmail.com. I'll include that in the description. And finally but not leastly, I am looking for a co-host, at least until Drew can come back from school. If you are interested in applying for the position, either as a full-time every Monday gig or in a more broad, maybe once or twice type of thing, please email me as well. That's it for now. I want to thank everybody for listening, especially those of you who have been good enough to hang out for the 2.5 hours I have been at this. But I'm done for the night. Thank you all. God bless. And I will see you next week.